Welcome, everyone, to day 2 of the conference. Thank you for spending part of your LEAP day with us. The researcher panel will begin momentarily. During the session, we invite you to place questions for the panelists in the Q&A chat box. The panelists have prepared some questions in advance that center around the theme of the conference. We will address your additional questions at the end of their discussion. A huge thank you to our panelists for participating in today's session. I will now turn things over to the facilitator, Diane Lachey Barker, to begin the conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Lachey Barker, and I am the Director of State Engagement for the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships, or otherwise known as NACEP. NACEP's mission is to advance quality dual and concurrent enrollment programs for all students. We are the only national organization supporting programs, practitioners, and policies in the field. So that's a little bit about who I am. Let our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work in the field. So may we start with you, Julie?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Edmonds. I'm director of the Early College Research Center. We're a relatively new center, and we conduct, synthesize, and disseminate research on early college and then on related topics like dual enrollment, the post-secondary transition, and factors associated with implementing quality programming at the early college and in that post-secondary transition. Have been studying dual enrollment in early college for about 20 years now, and delighted to be here today.
Thank you, Julie. Jordan?
Good morning. My name is Xiaodan Hu. I'm associate professor in the higher ed program at Northern Illinois University. My research on dual enrollment focuses on the finance and policy, supporting student success in particularly in the community college sector.
Thank you. Taryn?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Taryn Ozuna-Allen. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Higher Education at Texas Christian University. And my research focuses on the student experience, primarily the experiences of historically minoritized student populations and how they access dual credit, and then how they leverage those experiences in their transition to college and overall first-year experience.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Jason Taylor.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Taylor. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Education Leadership and Policy at the University of Utah. It's wonderful to spend time with you all. My research, similar to my colleagues, has focused on dual enrollment and the impact of dual enrollment programs on equity and equitable student outcomes, among other things.
Thank you, Jason. So let's go ahead and get started. The theme of this conference is unlocking potential, expanding opportunities. It is really trying to get at how we expand access to and increase success in dual and concurrent enrollment. So let's set a little groundwork first by saying when we say dual enrollment, we're kind of talking about the umbrella of all things that are dual. So let's talk about expanding access. What does your research or the research of others tell us about who currently participates in dual enrollment and the best strategies to expand that access? Taryn, can we start with you?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So equity remains an important issue when it comes to dual credit implementation. Even though states and colleges and universities and even school districts have worked really hard to implement policies to broaden access, equity gaps persist. And the research shows that students who participate in dual credit typically identify as white, Asian, female, high income, and high achieving, which means, on the other hand, that students of color, low income, male students, maybe middle or lower achieving students, and English language learners are often left out of that participation. So some of the strategies that I've learned from research that can help broaden access include, we did a presentation on this yesterday, using validation theory. So students are assisted through academic and interpersonal validation. So that means faculty members who see their college-going potential, who see them as, college ready and are affirming in that dual credit experience. And then those individuals at the college or university or high school who are seeing the student as a whole student, so offering validation beyond the classroom, and seeing their different identities, their interests, right, and supporting and encouraging and mentoring them along the way. Another strategy that can be helpful is including the family. So sort of leveraging that familial capital and communicating with families often and in different modalities, as well as in different languages, to bring them into the conversation about what dual credit has to offer them, as well as their family and maybe siblings who are younger as well.
Thank you, Taryn. It's certainly important to bring the family in. Shadan, can I call on you about that same question?
Yeah, so along the same line, I think there are, to ensure equal dual credit access, I think there are three things, right? One thing is like information access, like Taryn, you said, including family, making sure that our students know that there is opportunities that you can take a college level course. There's equal academic access as well in different contexts. That looks a little bit different, but how do we make sure students all meet that academic threshold to be eligible to participate in dual credit? And I really want to emphasize the affordability of dual enrollment programs. Right, the federal experiment, which offered Pell Grants to dually enrolled students, basically said only offering financial support is not sufficient. You have to have these wraparound services. You have to have advising, to share information. You may have tutoring to support their academic preparation. But helping students to access these programs without adding another layer of financial burden is really, really critical. Yesterday in our session, there were several sessions touching on the funding models at the state level, at the local level. It was really exciting to see how there are different approaches to support students, some via more of the scholarships and grants form, some in the form of tuition waivers. So several colleagues and I are working on a research project trying to see, is there a better way to do this, right? What are the best practices to support students with low-income family backgrounds to access dual enrollment for free? How do we, I think along the same lines with like promise programs, how do we avoid making it another hurdle for students to navigate, have to fill out another application to apply for financial aid? Would it be easier for students to just know, I meet these eligibilities and I can access dual enrollment for free. So let us take care of those complex processes behind the scenes, and our students just need to access it and do well in those classes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Jason and Julie, would you like to jump in on this question about expanding best strategies to expand access?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I think, just echo what my colleagues said. I think about this a lot at the state level and state policy, which drives in many ways whether eligibility policy and whether that eligibility is either standardized across the state or in some cases unstandardized, which decades of research has really shown how state eligibility policies can serve as a barrier to access. So that, and state context and policy is so important to understanding this question of how to expand access, and that depending on who's what state you're in, we really have to think about access in different ways. In terms of what strategies to expand access, one promising practice, and we don't quite have the research yet to understand its impact, but is out of Washington State, for example. States and institutions and some other states are experimenting with auto enrollment policies. So we know students are eligible. Why do we ask them to fill out applications and apply? Let's auto enroll them and then have the support, of course, and infrastructure to support students once they are enrolled in classes. So so that's a good example of how some states and institutions are thinking about expanding access.
Yeah, I love doing these sessions because I always learn so much from my colleagues and really appreciate it. I think this idea of expanding access is something where we really have some good lessons from the early college model in particular. And there's a lot of early colleges are often focused on students who are historically underrepresented, underserved populations. So students who might be low income, first in their family, students who are members of racial or ethnic groups who are underrepresented. And they do a lot of really intentional recruitment. So they do outreach focusing on these specific populations. And so early colleges often go to a variety of kind of non-traditional venues to talk to people. So they might go to local churches, they might go to after-school programs, community centers, things like that to do outreach. They also really are very good about using kind of the student ambassador model where they're bringing students who have experience in the early college, and they're going to be students who are members of those populations they're trying to reach to talk to the middle school students who are considering enrolling in an early college program. And that really allows, I think that's a little bit what Taryn was saying too, it allows them to see themselves as potential students there so they can visualize themselves. And then I think we really also do need, I think Jordan was making this point too, we need to expand the population of students who are eligible and who can be successful. And so that involves really paying attention to the 9th and 10th grade experiences of those students. So making sure that there are instructional practices that are in place that help students get ready so that they can be eligible and take dual enrollment courses and be successful. And we've seen sites, there was a program in Ohio led by Columbus State, where they really tried to re-envision instruction in the 9th and 10th grade level. And that resulted in students increasing, or an increased number of students who were passing state exams. And so you get kind of high school benefits for that. And then as well, you're also preparing more students for dual enrollment.
Thank you so much. Let me move on to another question and ask this. So we know that equal access is only part of the issue for dual enrollment students. What does research say about how to help ensure that students are successful in these programs and that they can maximize the benefits that dual enrollment offers to them? Julie, you mentioned a few strategies. Do you want to expound on that? Are there any others?
Sure. So, and I think also that the early college model has a lot to share about supports, because that's really a critical part of the model. You know, you've got these increasing academic expectations. You can't just expect students to be successful in those, especially the populations that you're targeting. And so, so you need to make sure that there's supports there. So they do a lot of things, like they provide explicit instruction in academic behaviors, organizational time management, study skills, note-taking, things like that. Programs like Avid, a lot of them have programs like Avid to provide those sorts of skills for students. There's a lot of work around helping students learn to advocate for themselves with faculty, and they do that in a scaffolding way. So they may give the student an assignment like draft an email to your professor, and then they're going to review that email and make sure it's a good one, and then follow up with them. Did you go talk to your professor, et cetera? To get students ready. And then there's a lot of strategies that they use when students are taking early college, dual enrollment courses. So there's definitely a lot of active monitoring that's going on. They don't just send the students off to do the courses without following up with them. If the college has like an early warning system and they share those data with the high school, there are really lots of good examples of that happening. And the high school folks can monitor those students' performance in the same way that a college would be monitoring it. And even if they don't share data across institutions, they may have advisories where they ask the students to pull up their grades and the high school advisor will walk through those grades with the students. And then there are examples, for example, where more intensive examples where they might have a high school section that's paired with a college course. So students have a college course Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then on Tuesdays and Thursday, there's a high school teacher that is supplementing that course and providing assistance to the students while they're taking them. So those are just a few really robust examples, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie, for that. Taryn, you mentioned familiar family relationships. How can family relationships support student in some of these services or to be successful?
Yeah, so a lot of my research again focuses on historically underrepresented students. And so oftentimes they're the first in their family to attend college of any form and to enroll in dual credit in particular. And that presents a really exciting opportunity and some challenges as well. Students talk about wanting to do better, right? To honor their parents, to honor maybe the struggles of their parents, and wanting to be a good example and role model also for siblings or other family members or individuals in their community. So having that parental support is really important, and not just from a perspective of, go do college and college is good and more college is better, right? But being able to have conversations around, what are your aspirations and what are your goals and what fields are of interest to you, and being able to strategize with students and engage parents along the way is also really important. And of course, faculty members and peers, because they interact with faculty regularly, and to have that affirmation builds confidence in their abilities. And then peers serve as a support, as Julie had mentioned, I think in the previous question, and having those ambassadors who can talk through their experiences and share the positives of those experiences and give advice. Because if they're the first in their family, they don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what you don't know. So that's some of the research that I've found.
Thank you so much. That is so interesting. Jason, can you make the connection for services as through pathways or course transfer? I know you've done some work in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about the benefits, like what's the value of dual enrollment, and I think I've done some work in this area with Indiana, and I also want to point folks to the deep work that CCRC, the research that CCRC has done, which they found sort of this intentional connection between dual enrollment programs and sort of pathways. There's this phrase that we've used. I've heard it for years now at both research and practice conferences, sort of random acts of dual enrollment. And part of that, has been documented in how dual enrollment policy and programs have evolved over the years, and which hasn't quite been as structured or intentional as it should be. And many institutions and states are trying to embed and dual enrollment courses within pathways, so that the more we do that, the more likely we are to see students benefiting from their courses. And then you asked about transfer. This is, I do work on this as well, but I think transfer of dual enrollment is both a dual enrollment issue, but also maybe more broadly a transfer issue. I think we have more anecdotal evidence, and we actually have empirical evidence on the transfer of dual enrollment courses, but it's germane to the, again, the value, because what good are these courses if students don't get credit for them once they matriculate to college? So there is a ACRO study that surveyed institutions and found that about 86% of institutions accept credits for dual enrollment. But I think the second order question is, okay, how do these credits apply to students' degrees and pathways? And that question is, unfortunately, we don't have the best research on it, but we do have some good state policy that is trying to, I think, strengthen the transferability of dual enrollment credits.
Thank you, Jason. Jordan, can you talk a little bit about the connection between dual enrollment and long-term outcomes? There is a question in the chat about, long-term outcomes for students who don't have that 3.0.
Yeah, I do want to quickly touch on, right, how, because dual enrollment programs are booming everywhere. We have these programs developing really fast. And is this the time for us to pause and think, what are we expecting out of these programs? Sometimes we talk about this question is about how do we make sure our students are successful in these courses, but do we have realistic expectations? Are we just expecting students to get a head start, or building up that academic momentum, saving money, right? Getting a job, majoring in STEM, all these expectations, are they realistic for our students, for somebody who wants to experience what does college level course look like? So when we're thinking about the long-term outcomes out of dual enrollment for students and the sustainability of dual credit courses, I really think that alignment between what we are offering, that experience, and the expectation, of course, the program outcomes should align better. We talk so much about the significance of equity in dual enrollment, but which part of our program supports that, right? I think it's a time, because it's developing so fast, that we should slow down and think about how do we really engage the historically underrepresented students, for example, in STEM fields early on in high school, at these college level courses, to support that STEM equity in the future, in the long term. That alignment may get lost when everything else is happening, and we need to be clear about that ourselves, and we need to be clear about that in our communication with students, so we're on the same page. This is what you can't get out of the dual enrollment programs.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. That's really interesting. So you mentioned, the long-term effects in terms of students. So let's talk a little bit about the teacher shortage and what are the implications of dual enrollment for educational leaders? And I'm going to toss this out to the entire panel.
Diane, you've hit on a really important issue, because there's this issue of capacity, right, with expansion, and there are different ways in which dual enrollment can be implemented. And so in some of those, and they have different capacity implications, right? So if it's college faculty that are providing dual enrollment courses either on the campus or at the high school, you need to have sufficient college faculty. If they're high school teachers, you need to make sure that these teachers are credentialed. And make sure that they are able to have received credit. And I think this is something that you all, Diane, I'm going to turn it back on you a little bit, because I think that NACEP has actually been doing really a lot of work in this area, right, in terms of, particularly in terms of expanding the capacity of high schools to have teachers, credentialed teachers, who can provide those concurrent enrollment opportunities. So do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing?
Thanks, Julie. It's really depending on the regional accreditor, first of all. That has a lot to do with it. But and we're not researchers. We do have a research commission, which Jason Taylor is the outgoing chair of. So I'm going to flip it to Jason to kind of dig a little bit more into that one. But before I do, let me just say that we do have a host of resources on the NACEP.org website. And a lot of the resources do address some of the teachers pipeline issues that we are seeing literally across the country, both in urban and rural settings. So yeah, Jason, I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit about that, or building momentum in dual enrollment, as a warning sign for students to develop their own momentum, as well as our educational leaders.
Yeah, well, I'll just, comment on the faculty piece and capacity. I think, this has come up in so many conversations over the past years, particularly as it relates to the policy relevant question. You mentioned accreditation, and, if there are HLC accredited states in the audience, you are very much aware of the recent policy clarification that HLC provided. And I think the broader research question that, folks want to know is, what is the relationship between faculty qualifications and student outcomes? And, what is the impact of, does it matter if faculty have 18 credits in a discipline? Does it matter if faculty have a master's degree on student learning and student outcomes? And, we just don't have the evidence base to answer that question. And so I think there's a real sense of urgency to sort of better understand that question. So, but I will say, there are states, Indiana being one of them, that, a few years ago, their state passed, a program to help credential faculty, to incentivize high school faculty to get additional credentials so they would qualify to teach dual enrollment. So I think there are ways that states and institutions can expand capacity and address sort of the shortage for qualified faculty, given the current or evolving state and regional accreditation policy context.
Yeah, Jason, I was really thinking about Indiana and their work there to increase, enhance teachers' credentials. And I think there are implications too for when people think about hiring teachers too. So recognizing that we've got this teacher shortage, right? So I don't know that you want to add necessarily additional credentials on top of that. But for people to, as they're thinking about kind of the teachers that they want to hire, making sure that some of those teachers have the credentials to teach college courses. And then also when universities or colleges are thinking about who to hire, are there teachers who are interested in teaching? Are there faculty who are interested in teaching dual enrollment? Because that's definitely, there's a growing number of colleges that have a substantial portion of their courses being dual enrollment courses, being taken by high school. So I think it's absolutely something that we can't ignore. And I would agree with Jason that I don't know that the research is there to support effective strategies at this point yet.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. We kind of deviated a little bit on that. I appreciate it. So before I get to the questions that are in the question box and in the chat, because it seems very lively right now, which is awesome, let me just ask you guys one quick question, and that is about the future of dual enrollment research. What should the future of this field look like? What should the direction be? How should researchers engage with practitioners? As a former practitioner, I'm really interested to hear your response to that question. How can you engage more with practitioners? How can we make those connections? And what should we look to improve both the research and the use of research? I know that's a loaded question. So Jason, I'm going to start with you. You're
Sorry,
muted.
I'll unmute myself there. Yeah, that's a big question. And, a group of us, including all of the folks on this panel, a group of researchers and dual enrollment policymakers and leaders sort of tackled this broad question a couple of years ago in terms of, what do we still need to know? What's unanswered about dual enrollment, particularly as it relates to advancing equitable dual enrollment policy and practice. And we produced a pretty lengthy report and identified over 150 research questions. I'll put a link, or actually, I think I'll put a link to that in the chat here so folks can access it. But we sort of identified 5 big buckets of research questions, and I'll just mention those briefly. The first is, centering equity and justice in all dual enrollment research. As sort of Taryn pointed out right at the beginning, we just have persistent equity gaps in access and outcomes across almost every state context, although we're seeing progress in some states closing those. But if we're not centering equity in our research, then we're just missing the mark on the potential of dual enrollment. The second is examining design and its influence on access and outcomes. Some of the questions that have come up in this or conversation in this session here, just we don't quite have enough evidence on, does it matter if faculty credentials matter? Does it matter if if the courses are delivered on-site at a high school or at a college? Does it matter to integrate support services? We just don't have a strong enough evidence base. So the more research we have on that, the better, particularly as, practitioners and policymakers are trying to make decisions about what to fund and what to, how to design their programs or enhance the design of their programs. The second is about refining dual enrollment outcome measures and just, getting more, sort of to Joe Don's point, getting more sophisticated about what we're measuring and what outcomes we're measuring and why. The third is about the student experience, or the fourth is about the student experience. So really elevating student voice and using student voice to sort of understand the student experience and the impact on program. And then the fifth is just actually a big bucket of new and emerging research topics, some of which we've covered on in this session. But I'd encourage folks to look at that document, and I'll leave it to my other colleagues to talk a little bit more about engaging with practitioners. But wanted to share that we have a really smart group of folks who have spent a lot of time identifying, what do we need to know and what's most important to know. And a lot of that is embedded in that document I shared in the link.
Thank you, Jason. Would anybody else like to tackle this question? Throwing it out there to the group.
I mean, I can talk about, I think there are several things that will change how we study dual enrollment beyond Jason and his research team's 150 research questions. I'm really curious because right now we talk so much about the enrollment cliff. Is there going to be, what's going to happen with dual enrollment in the picture? Is there going to be intensified competition, or is there going to be more collaboration among the sectors, right? The community college for your transfer. And how dual enrollment will impact students when the conversation around college readiness and academic merits change in college admissions practices. When we think about how students make decision in should I take dual enrollment, sometimes they don't just think about dual enrollment versus no dual enrollment. Sometimes they think about dual enrollment or APIB or both, or all of them, right? There's a relatively small number of research on those kind of comparison, especially independent research. I always feel like as the researcher, sometimes the nature of our work is a little bit different. It's really, whenever I talk with practitioners, there are unspoken perceptions, right? They will share at their college their unspoken perceptions about the value, the rigor of these different types of college level courses. So what does that mean in practice, and in how we should evaluate the role of dual enrollment in recruitment, admission, right, in the process? I think that practitioner knowledge is just invaluable in unpacking a lot of those whys. It's really hard to approach it only with one paper, one research project, trying to understand why.
So much. You are so right about the why. I'm going to toss that one over to Taryn. Why do the disparities exist and continue to persist despite some of our best efforts? We know that the research is out there, and what are we missing here? Why does it continue?
Oh man, that's like the $1 million question, I think. Because we keep seeing them exist and persist, and it's, trying to understand the how and the why behind it in order to kind of get at the root of the issue. And I think we have to go to the students. Honestly, there's not a lot of research on particular subpopulations of minoritized students, limited research that focuses specifically on the Latinx student experience or African American student experience when it comes to dual credit. And I'm talking about those two particular racial ethnic groups because they historically remain underrepresented. So there's a lot. Probably one of the 150 questions that we had was trying to understand more of that, the how and the why, and not to take, these experiences don't happen in a vacuum, because we also have to consider the social, political, historical context of schooling and who's been included and excluded in those experiences, as well as opportunities. And so we have to understand their experience and context. And I think that investigating that further will help us to broaden access. But more work needs to be done. And it's hard, especially as scholars, as researchers, to conduct the work and disseminate it quickly because of the review process that is required. So there are strategies I've seen, in order to engage practitioners, right? Like doing presentations on at the high school or college campus, writing briefs that just sort of quickly summarize key takeaways, engaging stakeholders also on social media and highlighting findings and disseminating research a little bit more quickly in that way. But also we're here. So if you all in the audience have ideas, please share them with us. We look to partner and be able to get this work in the hands of folks who are on the ground, and need it.
Yeah, especially again, as a former boots on the ground person, it is definitely appreciated that you guys are doing the work. Julie, how can we get more students to take advantage of dual enrollments?
Well, and I think that's definitely one of the areas for additional research that we need to look at. And so there's interest in effective strategies around recruitment and awareness building and support. And I think those are all things, really rich areas for future focus. And I also wanted to comment a bit on the engaging with practitioners. So I do this work, and I suspect my colleagues do this work as well, because we want to make a difference in outcomes for students. And I think the only way you do that is by working in partnership with people who have the boots on the ground, who have the real lived experiences. And so all of our work we definitely try to do in partnership. This conference, for example, is the result of a research practice partnership grant that we have with the community college system and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And we meet monthly with our team members, and we developed the questions that we're investigating together. We bring thorny analytic questions to them and say, how do we need to think about this? Or sometimes there are findings that we really don't understand. And we talk them all through as a group and say, here's some possible explanations for what's going on. And then they use that information to improve their policies and their program implementation. And I think that from my perspective, that's really the best way to do research and make sure that the research that we're doing has an impact. So.
Thank you, Julie. It certainly has. I'm going to turn to the questions in the Q&A box. And Jason, the first one is directed towards you. So thinking about student outcomes as a result of dual credit experience, what disparities have you seen in research? All participating students may not benefit equally, have inequitable effects. When expanding access, what might we need to consider in examining and ensuring that students who gain access have equitable outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the link that I posted in the chatter group that sort of took stock of the literature, our assessment of the current published evidence is that it's mixed. Some studies show that dual enrollment reduces inequities, and other studies show that dual enrollment, dual credit, exacerbates inequities, right? So great, how useless are we as researchers to come to that conclusion? But the real answer, I think, lies in what I talked about earlier is we really need to be looking at the relationship between design and outcomes. Some of Julie's work, she can probably speak to this in terms of what she's found in the early college, high school models that have intentionality around equity and robust support systems for students. So that is a different model than a student finding their way into an English dual enrollment course on their own, or because someone said take a course and they're all of a sudden in a course. I've done qualitative research talking to students, and students have said, I didn't realize this was a dual enrollment course, right? So all of that to say is, we're how we design our programs and the purpose of our programs matters quite a bit in terms of the effects. Just to answer the second part of that question, in terms of what we might need to consider in terms of equitable outcomes, I think a good starting point is looking at the data. I think a lot of, and some programs don't have capacity, research or, institutional research capacity, but partnering with their IR office or other researchers, just, if you don't know the answer to a basic question, like, do my low-income students or students of color have equal outcomes as my more wealthy students or white students? Like, that is a first order question for folks to think about. And then the second order question is, okay, okay, why, and what unpacking that is super critical.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I would say that so we've looked at both the early colleges, and then we also have this bigger project looking at North Carolina's 3 pathways. And shameless plug, you can come to my session that starts at 11 o'clock if you want to hear about some of the specific findings there. But our research actually does go against some other of the findings that Jason had. So we do see that in particular, economically disadvantaged students seem to be ones that are benefiting the most from dual enrollment. Particularly if we're looking at things like bachelor's degree attainment, which that's one of the outcomes that we look at. And that population in particular seems to be benefiting in general. And then I would also say that there's also some evidence, because we've been looking at rural and urban as well, and there's some evidence that rural students are actually benefiting more from dual enrollment, and mostly I think because they don't have as many alternative options to them for higher level course taking. So I do think when we look at some of these subgroups as well, we need to be paying particular attention to geographics as well, and rural and urban distinctions also.
Thanks so much, Julie. There is another question from Frank in the Q&A box. We know and he did not address anyone in particular, so feel free, panel, to jump in. We know from experience that student readiness for college classes in high school is a significant barrier to access. There are districts like North Carolina, Texas, and other states trying to strategize ways to address readiness by implementing district-wide early college or college and career readiness strategies. Wondering how much has been learned about the effectiveness in K-12 approach when this is implemented in a statewide system or system-wide approach. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I can talk about that a little bit from our Illinois context. Is we had our statewide policy trying to make sure all high school students are college ready. So transitional math and transitional English is in the process. So what happened is we don't require a 4th year math for our high school students. That our high school students now have the option, if they don't meet the college readiness marks, they have the option to enroll in transitional math courses. So basically, right, it's part of our larger developmental education reform that students no longer trying to avoid taking those long sequence of developmental education after they graduate from high school, but really in the last year of high school, you need to take these additional courses to make sure our students are ready. And because the nature of the policy is we have a lot of local control. So we're seeing, even though it's a statewide policy, we're seeing some school districts would have more of an accelerated version of transitional courses in the first semester of their 4th year in high school. And then by the time they graduate, by the time they finish their first semester, they should be considered college ready. And then in the second semester of the 4th year, some of our students that went through transitional math would be able to participate in dual enrollment before they graduate from high school. So as a way to expand access and get our students to be college ready as early as possible and keep that momentum in math learning in the 4th year of high school. In terms of empirical evidence to support that, we're in the process of doing a statewide evaluation. What was tricky is when the program was implemented, there are also other developmental education like reforms, right? Multiple measures, we have COREC, we have everything in place. And then you throw a little bit COVID in there. It was really hard to isolate and say it's because of the statewide college ready transitional curriculum that's leading to these impacts. But we're still in the process of tracking it, in the long term. Maybe it'll become clearer to see how does that college readiness piece support dual enrollment.
Right. Thank you.
I'll
You want to
can
jump
I
in? Sure. Sure,
just add to
Jason.
that. I mean, I think
Absolutely.
another, in terms of, if I'm understanding Frank's question correctly, sort of how do you scale something statewide that might be happening locally? And I think that's very challenging. I also think states can play a role. We did we saw this in Utah where the state system identified the local districts with the largest equity gaps in dual enrollment participation, and then funneled resources and support to those districts to try to address, access and participation. And I think we're still trying to learn, what the effect of that is. But I think, in terms of what a state can do, how they can, it may be worth states, targeting their resources to those districts or local partnerships where we see the biggest gaps, and then turning towards some early intervention strategies like what Jodan mentioned.
You're absolutely right, Jason. As if those of you who are familiar with NASEP know that we have an accreditation process for institutions, but currently we are working on research to look at the quality of programs and what can states do to support quality programs and in turn support our students. So, and I think that's a new piece of research that really hasn't been touched yet that we, thanks to a GACE grant, we're working on right now. And hopefully we'll have a toolkit so that, Frank, you are able to take that to those powers that be within your state and say, hey, this is how you can better support those of us who have our boots on the ground. I'm going to ask that last question, and I'll start with you, Taryn, because it looks like it's definitely in your wheelhouse. Is there research that looks at subgroups, outcomes, et cetera, how Black males or Black females, Latina males, Latin females are impacted by participation in dual enrollment?
Oh man, it's limited. It's very limited out there. I've done some work around Latinx students and their dual credit experiences in general, right? And just as Julie mentioned, they talked about learning the how-tos of college, a syllabus and faculty office hours, and how to navigate a campus if they're on a college campus, and those types of things. They talked about being a role model and a mentor and wanting to sort of do better, as I've mentioned before. I was sort of scanning the link that, our report, Jason, and found, I was like, well, let me look a little bit more here in case I'm missing anybody. But the report also highlights that there were 2 studies specifically focused on Black students and their experiences that we reported. And dual credit can help them, again, see themselves as college potential, see themselves as a college student. But they also reported some challenges there with perceiving these classes as for white students and not for them, as well as perceptions of counselor bias and like who gets tapped for these classes. So breaking, sort of understanding those perceptions a little bit more is definitely important in order to implement some strategies to help them overcome those barriers.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to tackle this last question as well?
I do think looking at this intersectionality is something that we have not done really well in as a research field. So looking again at Black males, or because there's lots of overlap too between different populations and different characteristics. And we often look at these subgroups individually and don't consider the way in which those different characteristics intersect. And so that's on our radar to start like exploring that in more depth. But I agree with Taryn that I don't know that there's a lot out there right now that kind of looks at that yet. So keep the good ideas coming.
Absolutely.
So some of our research looking at STAMP fields in particularly, some of the findings are suggesting that participating in dual enrollment for students of color, for women students are still not having a weaker impact on their STEM outcomes when you're comparing to, right, the white students or men students, because in STEM fields right now, the implication is in STEM fields, right, dual enrollment is still exacerbating that disparity between men, women students, and Black students, Asian students, and other students of color in STEM fields. And that's one of the concerns we have about dual enrollment and how does it impact STEM outcomes, thinking about, these majors being more lucrative in the future, wage employment opportunities, and what's the long-term impact on that.
Absolutely. Definitely more research is needed in this area. Well, we are just about out of time. I'd like to thank the panel, each one of you, for participating today and lending your expertise and your knowledge to this panel. And I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. And I hope you do take advantage of the rest of the wonderful sessions that are today. And I know Julie has another session. Does anybody else have another session coming up today? No? Okay. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. And everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of this conference. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.